it's important to treat a showreel as almost as a piece of art within itself, because if you just see it as a compilation of stuff, I think you're dramatically underselling what you do and how good your showreel can be.
Today's guest is Daniel Johnson, a writer and director from London who has made a name for himself by creating high-quality showreel scenes for actors from scratch. He has also written and directed short films, including A Productive Lockdown, which caught our attention here at Film Forums and led to the following very enjoyable interview.
Hi there, welcome to Film Forums. My name is Aiysha Jebali and I have with me a special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, my name's Daniel Johnson. I also make a lot of sort of independent short films, a few documentary pieces as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. So today we are going to kind of focus a bit more on the showreel thing, you know, for actors, trying to give them the secret sauce to good showreel filmmaking. But obviously the reason that you are so good at what you do is because you are a filmmaker, you are a professional filmmaker, and you've made plenty of great films. And that's kind of how we came across you as well. So, you know, great to have you on board and to have you here to talk. So in terms of showreels, you don't just shoot and edit, you write the material as well, correct?
Absolutely. Every single scene that I've shot and directed, I've also written. So over many, many years, that's kind of always been my unique selling point with this stuff, is that I meet the actors, get to know them, and then write specifically for them, you know, write scenes that are suited to their casting types and to what they need. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And do you have any like genres that you tend to prefer to work in, or will you do anything?
Well, it's funny, before I did showreels, I feel like the kind of stuff I liked to write was sort of slice of life drama with a bit of comedy, or even comedy sketches as well. And I feel like that is maybe my comfort zone. You know, that's the stuff I would easily gravitate towards. But of course, doing the showreel thing for so many years, if that's all I did, I would soon run out of material, you know? So I think that doing the reels has enabled me to step out of my comfort zone and write things. Like 10 years ago, if you had asked me to write, I don't know, a police drama, I probably would have been filled with insecurity, thinking, oh, but I don't really know what happens in a courtroom, or I don't know what happens with a police interview. But through doing the showreels and just needing to write content like that, it just opened me up to many different things. Yeah.
Yeah. So what do you think that an actor, if they're going to go down the route of getting, you know, a showreel made for them rather than using, you know, footage from films that they've been in, maybe those films that they've been in are not high enough quality, or maybe they haven't done any film and they've come from a theatre background and they need, you know, first time showreel or just a more professional looking showreel. What would you say they should be looking for when they're looking for somebody like you?
Good question. I mean, there's a lot of options out there now to say, like, when I first started doing this, there wasn't really many people doing the from scratch thing at all. And the ones that were around were just filming scenes from like well-known TV shows and from movies that we all know and stuff. Now I feel like there are a lot more options. But I think if you're an actor looking to get into this, looking to shoot a showreel, I think it sounds obvious, but I think it's important to find someone you're collaborating with who you would want to collaborate with anyway, even if you didn't need a showreel. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, don't just work with them because someone said they're the best one, or because they're the cheapest, or because they're the most expensive. You know, like find someone whose work resonates with you and you know that it will suit you. Do you know what I mean? So that it's no good doing a reel that's all cinematic, but you know, if it doesn't capture you and it's not gonna do something that brings out the best in you as an actor and shows that to a casting director, then there's no point. So yeah, do your research, like with anything in this industry, and find someone whose work resonates with you, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I've never, you know, I've been acting for quite a while now, and I've never done the whole going to someone, you know, to get a showreel. I've always just used, you know, little bits of films or whatever that I've been in, even if they're not always the highest quality, you know what I mean, indie work or student work, whatever. So I haven't actually gone like the whole hog, but I am often impressed by what can be produced. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Can I just say one thing is, like, in an ideal world, people wouldn't need to do this. Do you know what I mean? Like, ideally, you would use short films that you've been in, or, you know, you got a little bit of TV work or whatever. But the tricky thing is, you could be, let's say you've done 4 projects, let's say 3 short films, and you was in an episode of Casualty for a minute. The tricky thing is that, like, one of the short films might have really bad sound. Another one of the short films, you're playing a vampire. Another one of the short films, just the worst script ever, and you overacted a bit or something like that. I mean, the TV one, it's a great credit, but maybe like all you're doing is saying to someone, here's your cup of tea, doctor. And that's it. And the tricky thing with a reel is you're trying to piece these things together, but they're not showing who you are, what you can really do. Like, I'm pretty sure most actors out there could be on Casualty and hand a cup of tea to a doctor, but that scene on a reel, yes, it shows that you had that credit, but it doesn't necessarily really show you doing anything or handling emotions, dealing with conflict. So yeah, like, I totally get the want to like patch it together out of bits and pieces. Yeah, I think a showreel done well is just a good, I was going to say shortcut, but I wouldn't even call it a shortcut. It's a tool. If you can get one job from that reel that pays you what you paid for the reel, then it was more than worth it, you know?
No, I totally agree with you. Like, I absolutely see the value in it. And I've always kind of toyed with the idea, but obviously, cost is a huge factor for actors because we have so many things to pay. Headshots are expensive, memberships, BAFTA membership, equity, all these things, and then casting sites as well. So that can definitely be a barrier, but it is a worthwhile investment. I definitely do believe that, especially now that I've seen a lot more of these reels being produced recently that are such high quality. Like yours are, like, I would never know that was made for a show reel. Well, genuinely, I would just be like, where can I see the rest of this film?
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. But, the way that I would make a showreel scene is the same way I would shoot a scene in a film project that I'm making. So it's the same process. Mm-hmm. But if anything, it's even better for the actor because I'm doing it for them. Mm-hmm. But yeah, you're totally right. I think years ago, there was a kind of, what's the word? I think people were against showreels from scratch because I think historically they were quite bad. And they would typically be either 2 people screaming at each other in a kitchen or 2 people randomly appearing on a field, pretending they're detectives, and it'd be really cliche dialogue, and they just sucked. Do you know what I mean? But I do think now, like you say, there's the skill level's gone up, and I think it's if you can afford it, that it's a good investment. And if you can't afford it, there's ways to build material cheaper, which we can talk about as well if you're interested. But yeah, it is an investment for sure.
Definitely. I mean, yeah, I think that's always something that actors will want to know, because the other problem I think that actors can have is that they might do a short film, but the nature of indie and student filmmaking, a lot of the time the film either takes a really long time to get finished, or it never comes out.
Right, or it never comes out.
Or it just never comes out. Like, that's the one that bothers me the most, to be honest.
Yeah, it's pretty common. Yeah. It's happened to me. I've had short films when I started out, or even a few years back, that I didn't finish. And I think what happens is you set out, a young filmmaker will set, I can't call myself young anymore, but a young filmmaker will set out with a great idea for a film. And in their head, it's like Scorsese mixed with Tarantino. It's going to be the best thing ever. And of course, they film it. The weather was bad. One of the actors didn't turn up, and their directing wasn't as good as they hoped. And they lose confidence. They don't get the edit done. And then before you know it, a year's gone by. Do you know what I mean? I think that's a common thing with indie film, with short films, with student films. Which for me is, I was lucky with my way of making short films, is that I was never a perfectionist. I don't mean that I didn't care about the quality. I did, and I do, but I mean that I would always do the best I can, put it out there, and then do the next thing, which enabled me to keep creating content. And I would guess most of the other showreel makers have that similar skill set in that they're able to produce, put it out there, and then do the next thing. But I think, yeah, for people starting out, doing their short films, often they just, if they don't like them, they kind of get pushed aside,
Yeah, or they get distracted by the next story that they want to tell as well. I've found that, and again, it's no offense or disrespect to, these filmmakers. I've absolutely loved working with everyone I've worked with. But when you're for an actor, your showreel is your calling card. You know what I mean? It's your selling point. And if, for example, like your hair and everything can change. If it takes 2 years for you to get footage, I personally can look like a completely different person based on what I do with my hair.
Short films, I think, are great. Even if you don't get great material, you learn so much doing them, and you make great friends that you'll be working with forever. And obviously when you start out as an actor, you might not be as good as you think you are at the beginning. And it's almost, as much as the filmmaker might be bad, it's good as an actor to get the practice in. So I think, the short films have, even if the material's not strong, there's such a learning experience that it's good to do. A good friend of mine who's now done tons of TV work. I remember I've been editing, it's my friend Deborah, her name's Deborah Baker, who anyone who's an actor should look up, because her reel now is all TV work. But I remember the first time I edited a reel for her, she gave me this, back in the day of DVDs, she came to me with this giant crate of 50 short films. And she was like, right, I need to make a showreel. And we literally watched all of them. And about 47 of them were terrible.
Yeah.
But 3 were pretty cool and pretty good. And that led, and my point being, the amount she would have learned from doing so many short films. Now, unfortunately, it's hard because that was 10 years ago. But now, if you don't have a showreel, it's hard to even get put in those short films. But
yeah.
But my point being, we all learn something from all those projects as well,
No, definitely. I completely agree. When I first started in film, for example, I was with a little film group, we were just like a little community group, and we were all terrible. I was an absolutely horrendous actor, and they were the worst filmmakers too, and they would openly admit that. The sound was non-existent. I'm not even kidding. There's no way that you could use that material at all. But we progressed really quickly, and we decided to really focus on our craft. And within 2 years, we were in festivals and we were winning things, you know what I mean? And they weren't small festivals, they were pretty decent ones. So I definitely think it's worth, putting in that work and getting that experience. It's the first thing I would tell any young actor anyway, is just go do work for free, get some experience, because you don't actually have the skill set yet to really, demand a certain pay.
Absolutely. And, it's a tricky thing, what you just said of go out there and work for free. I feel like now that's almost seen as a bad thing. But I feel like I learned everything that I learned from working on crappy films, making a horror film at 3 a.m. with a bunch of guys that I worked with in Tesco's. Do you know what I mean? That for me is, and I wrote a blog a few months ago. I think it was called The Magic of Starting Out. And the point was it's the best time in your life when you're young, and do you know what I mean? You're doing a night shoot on a really bad film with really cool people, and you're all making no money. And for me, that's, if anything, I'm trying to get back into that mindset now of making my own short films, purely for the fun of it and not thinking of career progression, because that's, you learn from the bad films. You don't learn from, if everyone watches and says you're wonderful, you don't learn so much from those,
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And the thing is, I am a big believer as well. I know there's this, there's sort of the 2 camps of paid or unpaid work when you're starting out as a creative in general. Now, I do think that if a production can afford to pay, then fantastic. Do pay people at least the national minimum wage if you have some kind of budget. But if everybody's kind of on the same level in terms of their skill and ability, I don't think anyone should have paid me back in 2009 to be in their movie.
Exactly. Yeah.
I wasn't any good. I really wasn't. You wouldn't have gotten your money's worth, you know? And that's me being brutally honest. Now, yes, I would like to be paid because I've put time and effort into, you know, learning and developing. But back then, no.
It's like two different mindsets. In the terms of like some people, like some filmmakers will say, and I'll do this from the day they start out, which is like, if you can get me these 6 lenses and these lights and this film will cost, I'll need this many thousands of pounds to make. That's one mindset. And then there's another mindset where someone will say, all I've got is this little light I got off Amazon and this camera I borrowed off my uncle. Do you want to make film? And like, for me, I've always gravitated towards that. When someone will just say to me, Dan, at the weekend, I've got a house. If you want to, like a few years ago, a friend of mine was working in a cafe and I just thought, I wonder if I can film in there. And she said that I could. So I wrote a comedy sketch for her, for just 2 of my friends to film in that coffee place. And then I borrowed a camera from a friend that was better than the camera that I had at the time and just tested it out. And looking back at it now, it's not shot that well because it was a new camera and it was, you know, but like for me, like I get excited by that stuff. I've lost the point I'm making really, but yeah, I think it's great to realize we're all not as good as we think we are. And then we keep practicing and we keep learning our craft, be that as filmmakers or actors. But yeah.
Yeah, no, totally. I think that's a really good mindset to have, to be kind of open-minded. And certainly also, you know, when it comes to showreels, what would you say are like the biggest kind of mistakes that you've seen, whether it's a professionally made showreel or whether it's a cut together, you know, mishmash of what they've done?
I mean, there's, oh God, so many. Let me think. The biggest mistake and the most common mistake is that someone's first scene will be with another actor who looks exactly like them. You know, it's like you having a showreel in a scene with someone with the same hair, same age, and the same hat that you're wearing. Do you know what I mean? Like it happens so often. Another mistake, I think, is to over prioritize something just because it was on TV. I saw an actor a few months ago show me her showreel, and the first scene was her walking into a room, putting a coat on someone's back, and then walking out the room again. I think she said like, "Thank you, sir," or something, and walked out. And I remember saying to her like, "Why did you use that scene?" And she was like, "Oh, that actor was I can't remember the name of him. It was someone like an Oscar winner. You know what I mean? It was like, because that was Tom Hanks." And I remember being like, "Oh, I didn't even notice him because I was looking. I knew it was your showreel, but I didn't know it was Tom. It wasn't Tom Hanks, but it was someone of that level." And the scene, you know, it doesn't help me to know that she can put a coat on someone's back in a high budget film. Like it doesn't give information to the viewer. So yeah, so mistakes like that. God, there's so many, you know, putting too much material on. Like if you've done 10 projects, often actors are maybe insecure that they don't have enough good stuff, so they use everything, you know. Whereas I think it's better if you have one good scene, just use one good scene. Or if you have like, let's say you've got 5 scenes, the first 2 are good, third one's meh, 4th and 5th are really bad. Like you don't want your reel to get worse and worse, because the viewer, which is likely to be an agent or a casting director, they're going to remember how they felt when they finished watching. So it's like watching a film. So if it ends terrible, they're not going to remember necessarily how great you were in the first scene. They're going to be left with this feeling. So yeah, like just only use the stuff that's really strong, you know. There's probably many others. I've written blogs and even a book about this stuff, but right now those are the things that come to mind. But
I read your blog earlier. Yeah, that's
cool.
Yeah, I think definitely though some of these things are really common and it doesn't occur to us, do you know what I mean? Because it's not our job to know, if you know what I mean. But it is, but like we see it like that. We're just like, oh, I did this thing, I'm going to put it there. You know what I mean? I wouldn't really necessarily pay attention to whether or not someone in the scene looks like me. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly. But I think that you need, like, I think it's tough with actors. Obviously now actors are much better at editing these days because of self-tapes and things. So a lot of actors edit their own material.
Yeah.
But I would say it's maybe you're not the best audience for yourself. And it's not me saying go to a showreel person. It could be like find an actor friend who will tell you the truth. Do you know what I mean? So, because you need someone to just point out, oh, you do realize your first scene and the third scene, you're playing a doctor in both of them. And we already know you can play a doctor from the first one. So we don't need the third scene. And just stuff like that, you know? It just helps to have someone, yeah. And I think that it's important to treat a showreel as almost as a piece of art within itself, because if you just see it as a compilation of stuff, I think you're dramatically underselling what you do and how good your showreel can be. You know, so I think it's, and maybe art is the wrong word, but it's yeah, there's so much. Your showreel speaks so much. Oh, and one other big tip, I might have said this in the blog, but I think that the worst thing you can do on a reel is try and make yourself seem like a bigger deal than you really are. Do you know what I mean? Or trying to make it, like, sometimes, like when I first started editing reels, I would, if someone had one line in like a Ricky Gervais TV show or something, I would, you know, I'd have that line and then I'd also edit in a reaction shot of them from 5 scenes later and would try and make it seem like a big deal. But any casting director who's going to watch your reel, they're going to know exactly the type of role that you had because they're not stupid. Do you know what I mean? So now for me, like if the scene doesn't earn being in the reel, you're not going to fool anybody. You know, when you see a short film that's trying to pretend it was a big Hollywood budget, but really it was just two people filming in their back garden. Like, own and embrace what it is rather than treating it like it's a bigger thing, because people will be able to tell. When I create a showreel scene for an actor, they're the protagonist of that story. You know, they're a character that is breaking up with someone or asking someone out or telling someone a crime happened, or they're arresting someone, they're telling their mother they're never going to speak to them again. Whatever it is, we're seeing a character, you know, have a fully fledged story where there's a conflict, we see them handling it, and we see a resolution, we see them win or lose. So we invest in them, you know, as a character. And that's kind of one of the benefits of doing something from scratch, is that you can put in all the structural things in a story that will make it interesting to a viewer. Just like if you was making a film or a TV commercial, do you know what I mean? It will have the sort of storytelling in it. Yeah.
Do you think that people should have a few different show reels that they, you know, would use this one for that type of casting and then that one for that type of casting? Or
Good question. I think now that I feel like we're slowly shifting towards actually people separating their reels a bit and kind of just saying, here's me playing a doctor, here's this clip, and here's me doing this thing, and here's me doing comedy. So I mean, I think by and large people still watch, you know, show reels that are a mixture. But I think that, yeah, it's changing a bit, so it's good to maybe have the separate things, but you still want them to genuinely feel like you as an actor. Do you know what I mean? So it has to suit your typecast. So if I was an actor, which I'm not, someone said to me the other day, an actor said to me that I'd play the IT geek or something. And, you know, the reality is I wear glasses, I'm of a certain age, I'm a man, like that's probably what they interpret. So, okay, I'd play the IT guy and I'd play, you know, I'd have to play what suits me. I would probably not play, well, I wouldn't play the bodybuilder, the heartthrob, you know what I mean? You have to know what suits you.
I think that's the hardest part for an actor, is to know what suits them. So do you help with that when you're, designing the showreel?
Absolutely. Yeah, that for me is a crucial part of it, is that I'll sit down with an actor. Um, Obviously, an actor has had so many different people tell them what they are. They've had an acting teacher say sometimes horrible things. Sometimes you're too ugly, you're this part of your body's too big, and all these horrible things. But and also other people saying, oh, you play nasty people, or you play the girlfriend, and all these things that just confuse an actor. Um, and I feel like my job is to simplify it. I think first of all, everyone, a bit like a first impression, or a bit like, it's a bit like being on a dating app and swiping. You have a first impression when you see someone, and ignore you can't ignore that first impression, because if you look at someone and you think they could totally play a doctor, or she could totally play like a manipulative this or that, or he could be a murderer. Like, that's useful information. So I feel like part of it is how we perceive someone. And then secondly, in meeting someone, you get a sense of their energy, you get a sense of, um, I guess, what they've been through in life as well. Like, can they play someone who's had a bad day a few times, or has had grief, or has been through anxiety, or you know what I mean? You can pick up on if comedy suits someone, or if, yeah. So that's definitely part of my job, is to get to know the person and write something that really suits them.
So on your website, you have different packages available for actors. Are you able to tell us a little bit about how you put those together, and why?
Sure. Yeah. So I only offer two packages really on my website. It's 3 scenes that I create, or 1 scene. The reason for 3 scenes was I felt like 4 is too many. If you have 4 or 5, I feel like the quality is maybe going to go down, or you're just going to have more than you need. And I think 2 scenes is fine, and you could do 2 scenes. But for me, if you have 2 scenes, then you end up just kind of playing with opposites. Like, oh, I can play an angry character and a sad character, or strong character and vulnerable character, or comedy serious, which is fine. But it just has this like oppositional thing that, for me, if you do 3 scenes, there's just a sort of fluidity to it, where I feel like I can be more creative and paint more of a picture of an actor. So for me, and it also means you don't over rely on any one scene. I think if you do 1 scene or 2 scenes, you feel like there's this need for perfection. Whereas once you have 3 scenes, you might find that maybe one of the scenes has like 20 seconds that's incredible, and that's all you need. And then the next scene you use 45 seconds of. So, just 3 for me over the years has been a great way to really showcase an actor, to not over rely on any one piece of material, but to give them good variation. 1 scene is good sometimes for an actor starting out, purely financially. It's like, let's just do 1 scene to get started. But more often than not, often there's actors who maybe they're only known for drama, and they get lots of TV work even, and they get lots of particular genre, but they maybe come to me and say, could we do a comedy scene, or could we do this or that? I had an actor a few years ago who was a regular on soaps for like 10 years, and then she had a baby and left the industry, and obviously 10 years went by, and then she just wanted 1 scene to show how she looks now, and to show that she can still act, and it kind of just got her back in the room. So yeah, 1 scene is good as well. Like, say, if someone like yourself, if you maybe had, like you say, you've got a bundle of material that you like, but you kind of think, what if I just had one really strong piece that shows that I can do comedy, or that I can play a farmer, whatever it is that's your thing. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's so yeah, they're the two sort of packages that I tend to do. And obviously the 3 scene one comes with, I'll edit it into a full show reel and all that kind of stuff as well. So yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really good point about the whole 1 scene versus 3, definitely. like for me, like my interest was comedy, because if we're talking about what I like to watch, it's comedy or action, right? And what I'm cast as usually previously it was more horror and victim sort of roles. So I started to really look for, even indie films or whatever that would kind of show a bit more strength of character as well to me, because you know I get that I look like, you were talking about types, you know what I mean? Like, so I'm very small, very, dainty or whatever you want to call it. So I look quite vulnerable, I guess would be the right word. But I'm actually like a really well-trained martial artist, and I'm quite a strong personality as well. So, so I'm kind of like, I got to a certain point where I was like, I want something that at least shows a strong character, someone who's
absolutely. And you've kind of brought on to an important point that, as much as we've talked about casting types and how the industry perceives you, like at the end of the day, it's your career, and you've got to do stuff that excites you. So if the industry, which it's entitled to do, if the industry just thinks, oh, she plays victim, she plays the little girl who's in a horror film who gets whatever, on the one hand, you're like, fine, that's how you're perceived. But they're not going to magically one day just think, oh, she's perfect for comedy. Like you have to, or she can play these really strong characters who, kick some butt and do, like you have to show them. Do you know what I mean? Like, and you might just do a great self-tape and get the role, and that could well happen. But like, for example, if you was creating real material, it's more empowering to do your own thing, or to hire someone to develop those scenes with you, because then you are taking control of your destiny a bit more, and that's, for me, like, as much as I pay attention to casting types and to what someone's going to realistically play, at the end of the day, like you could, for all I know, you could be like, you yourself you could literally be a serial killer for all I know. You could play a serial killer. You could be I don't know you very well, so you could be a very sweet person who is really, or you could have no friends and play. You could be a loner. Like, I don't, so realistically, we're all a mishmash of different character traits. So if you are getting typecast, a showreel scene or two or three is a great way to take control of how you're perceived. The great thing with a well-written scene and a well-directed scene is that you can play a victim type character in a scene who stands up for herself and says to someone, if you ever do that again, this will happen. Do you know what I mean? Or you can have a strong character who finally has a moment when they break down and the vulnerability shows. So, and that's, for me, has been the important thing of writing scenes. I had a client recently who said to me, she's always seen as like the hot girl role. It's always the sexy character, and she's fed up. She wants something a bit more meaty. And there's two ways of approaching that. One is to completely ignore how she's perceived, or the other way is to write a character that maybe people perceive as, oh, that's just that girl, but then in the scene, through her intellect or through her strong-mindedness, she does something that shows she's more than just a pretty face.
She could also be someone who's pretty but socially awkward. You know what I mean? She could be neurodiverse,
Absolutely.
High functioning neurodiverse, but definitely different, you know what I mean? And maybe is not aware of how pretty she is.
Absolutely.
And that can come across, I think, as well.
Absolutely. And that's why when you do a really good scene, you can kind of play with expectations. Did you see a scene you probably saw on my website, there's a clip, it's called The Bad Defendant. There's a scene where a woman's being questioned for murder, and she's in such a panic when she answers that she keeps saying more things that will implicate her in the murder because she's so nervous. Now, when I met that actor, she's a fantastic actor, but some of the stuff she'd shot previously, I think because she's quite a sort of buzzy, fast talking person, she almost had a fear that she'd be perceived as being too quirky or overacting. Whereas the scene I wrote used those parts of her personality, like her quirkiness and her fast pacedness. I used them as a tool to, I put them in the character so that she would talk herself into a murder charge, whatever an actor's insecure about, or whatever, if they're getting typecast in one way. There's a way to use it and flip it into something more interesting.
What's clear about all of your characters anyway that I've seen as well is that even though it's a short scene, they're multi-layered. And what you're talking about here as well is you're talking about kind of challenging perceptions within the story as well, which I think is a great idea. It's a really good way to kind of approach that from an actor's perspective. Absolutely. As well as it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll be honest with you, like, and to anyone listening, like, if I didn't do that, I would get bored as a writer director. If I just wrote, here's a character who's the victim and she's upset, and someone asks her if she wants to go to a party and she says, no, I'm too upset, end of scene, I'd be bored doing that. Do you know what I mean? So for me, creatively, it's good for me to have characters who are more interesting, and it's good for the actor because you don't want, that's like a really bad student film, is like two characters meet, they get stoned, they play Xbox, they chat about boys or girls or whatever, and then they order a pizza and then the film ends. Like, it's boring. Do you know what I mean? Like, for me, the good thing about a showreel is the tools that I would use in crafting a short film or a sitcom. I can do that in one scene. Do you know what I mean? To keep it interesting and to give the characters an arc, which just makes it more interesting for the actor and for the viewer, and will lead to a better scene.
Yeah, and I also had one other question, in regards to, how we were talking about the one scene and the three scenes. I also noticed that you have, obviously COVID has been a really complex time for creatives, and certainly for anyone trying to make a film. So you've done two things that I find really interesting. So one, you have an online, like, remote version where you're directing the actor to shoot their own, right? But you're still the writer and everything like that, and still editing. One, could you tell us a little bit about how that actually works, that setup?
Sure, yeah.
and how you mastered it during COVID? And then the other thing was you shot your own film as well, very self-contained, and did it all yourself. And maybe you could talk us through a little bit about some of the precautions and things that you did to make it safe, or as safe as possible.
Yeah, of course. First, I'll tell you about the online showreel scenes. And by pure coincidence, that actually came about before COVID. Literally like 2 or 3 months. Well, maybe COVID was already in China, and maybe I perceived the chat. I don't know, but essentially, my girlfriend's mother, unfortunately, was very sick in hospital in America, and I was over there supporting her, and I was in a hospital waiting room doing some work, just sitting there. My girlfriend was in the hospital room with her mum, and I read a tweet by an actor that should I share this on a podcast? But I'm going to have to now. I'd read a tweet by an actor who wrote some really angry message about, oh, it's so unfair that showreel is so expensive, and that blah, 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 it's too expensive. Actors should never have to pay for a showreel, blah, blah, blah. And something about it just irked me. And I was like, well, then do it for free. So I put a tweet out and I said, right, I'm looking for 10 actors. We're going to create a showreel scene tomorrow. I'll write it, I'll send you it, and we're going to make it. And the way I wrote it, I wrote a bunch of scenes that were all not just set in one place, but the premise was that someone would have a reason to film themselves, like they're on a Zoom call, or like the world's about to end and they're going to leave a message to their loved one, or they're about to commit suicide and they're leaving a message for their ex to tell them. So for me, a big thing about low budget filmmaking is, again, rather than pretending it's a big movie, like, if all you've got is your phone, make the premise so that the character's on their phone. Like you could have a scene where you're leaving a WhatsApp message to a friend or something. So these actors would film these scenes, and I would just either by Zoom or by email would say, oh, that was a great take. Maybe try it a bit more this, bit more that. And then that night, I think, I edited all the scenes. And by edit, all I did was put a record button in the corner, or have it say Facebook Live or YouTube Live, or put a little camcorder box on it or something. So the point being that I was a bit bored during lockdown of like self-tapes as well. So yeah, after I'd done that project and lockdown happened, actors being proactive were doing lots of self-tapes and putting them on Twitter and stuff, which is fantastic. And I don't mean to knock that at all. But for me personally, watching, like if I'm casting a film and someone does a self-tape for me, fine. But I feel like a self-tape out of context, an actor against a white wall talking to no one or talking to their roommate is not the most engaging thing necessarily. So for me, I'm like, if we just made it into a movie, make the character handle the camera, get the camera and say, guys, I've got to tell you a secret, and get really close to, it made it engaging. So yeah, over lockdown, I started doing that, and a drama school, Arts Ed, got in touch with me. They'd had their showcase cancelled, so they thought of doing some kind of showreel thing. And I was like, yeah, I'll just write scenes for all the actors and direct it. So we ended up, I met via Zoom during lockdown. I think it was 28 actors at Arts Ed, wrote scenes specifically suited to them, directed them by Zoom. It sounds crazy now looking back, but we were all crazy. It was lockdown. And just did like 28 scenes on Zoom and emails. And then again, I edited them by just adding a graphic to the screen. And then that became a way of doing scenes,
Yeah, that's really smart. And yeah, really intriguing. And obviously you did make a film as well in person, what was that process like during COVID?
I'm trying to think now. We didn't make it during a lockdown. We made it, I'm so confused looking back of what the rules were, but essentially it was made during one of those times when you can, if it's a workplace, you can do it. And maybe I'd have to check when we shot it, but it wasn't illegal is what I'm saying. But essentially, we were socially distanced. There was no crew. It was me and two actors. I rented an Airbnb. We filmed it all in one location. And the film was called A Productive Lockdown. And the premise was the guy wants to write a novel. He feels like the girlfriend doesn't support him. And then, unbeknownst to him, she writes her own novel and, he can't handle it. And I set it sort of in this almost like exaggerated world where the COVID lockdown is so intense that these guys have no choice but to be stuck together.
It is now safe to go outdoors, but only if you are already outdoors. If you are indoors, remain indoors until you are outdoors. And if you are outdoors, remain there for 14 days. If you have been in physical
It's going to be another 6 months, isn't it?
6 more months of lockdown.
Yep.
I thought it was really, really well done. I mean, I could even see the social distancing with the actors on the couch, you know what I mean? So one's on one end of the couch and one's on the other. So although they're stuck together, they're also kept separate, if you know what I mean? And
although the problem was that two people who've watched the film said to me, oh, I thought they were brother and sister because they're so distanced.
Yeah,
it seems like they're not partners, but yeah.
But to me, I think that spoke to the place in their relationship. You know what I mean? The fact that there was a visual distance between them. And I actually thought that was really effective given the state of
that was my intention, but yeah, hopefully more people see it your way. But
yeah, definitely. I mean, we will have it linked in the description as well below. And also to your website as well, so that people can stay in touch and kind of, again, support your filmmaking journey as well, and get in touch if they're looking for a showreel or at least even some advice as well, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. And I'm like on Twitter as well, I get a lot of questions about the Showreel stuff. So yeah.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
And
my voice is gone for some reason. I'm if we carried on, I'd struggle, I think. What's happened?
Sorry, I'm sorry. I have a way of dragging it out of people, don't I?
No, it's been great. It's been great. I don't know what's going on. Maybe I need to do a COVID test. Yeah.
Let's hope not. Yeah. Well, thanks again. Honestly, it's been great having you on, and really valuable, wisdom coming from you on all things.
Thank you very much. Thanks a lot.